faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, we're diving into the long novel Great Expectations by the 19th century British writer Charles Dickens. Many folks grinding through tough times might have dreamed, oh, how awesome would it be if a huge fortune just dropped in my lap? And guess what? That actually happened. Over 100 years ago in England, a poor kid named Pip suddenly got an unexpected windfall, letting him receive a top-notch education and step into the high society he'd always dreamed of. And this Pip, whose life took off like a rocket, is the hero of Dickens' Great Expectations we're covering today. The book's original title, Great Expectations, literally means a big fortune. But who left that fortune to Pip? And did Pip actually achieve his great expectations with it? Um, Actually, you might have seen the movie adaptation, Great Expectations. Yep, that's the one. From the film's title, Pip's great expectations don't look too bright. The truth is, that Great Expectations bit is pure irony, packed with sharp satire. That satire kind of mirrors Dickens's own painful mindset while writing it. Great Expectations first came out in 1861. Back then, Dickens was nearly 50. While writing, his marriage to Catherine was falling apart. He later fell for an actress and split from his wife. But this actress was over 30 years younger, so the fling stirred up huge controversy. All the gossip piled on the pressure. Plus, around that time, Dickens's daughter, Kate, married against his wishes, and his most cherished brother, Fred, passed away, and his mom was on death's door from illness. All this dragged him down into a funk. While feeling low, Dickens gained a deeper grasp of life's and society's complexities. That's why Great Expectations, written during this phase, is often seen as a key late work summing up Dickens's thoughts. Out of the 100-plus novels and stories Dickens penned, Great Expectations ranks as one of his most polished. It's hailed as a masterpiece of English with flawless structure. In the tale, Pip gets an unexpected fortune, but the mystery benefactor doesn't show till the end. In uncovering this truth, Dickens created unforgettable classic characters, and the novel embraces themes like love, growth, revenge, and reconciliation. Its rich complexity in form and meaning is the very charm of Dickens's storytelling. The protagonist of Great Expectations, Pip, is a poor orphan fostered by his impoverished sister, Mrs. Jo Gargery. One early morning, Pip met an escaped convict named Magwitch in the churchyard cemetery. Magwitch had fled from prison hulks, hungry and exhausted, and upon encountering Pip, he flipped him head over heels. But Pip had nothing in his pockets except a piece of bread that fell out. The convict lifted the trembling Pip onto a high tombstone, snatched the bread, and wolfed it down hungrily, then demanded, "Hey, where's your mom?" Shaking with fear, Pip pointed and replied, "Over there, sir." This startled the convict, who bolted away, but after a few steps, hearing nothing, he halted. He turned and glared at Pip, who was petrified, pointing at the tombstone and stammering, "Look at the name Georgiana. That's my mom." Turns out, Pip's mom and dad were buried right there in that graveyard. At the novel's start, this scene with a cemetery and an escaped convict, if written by a less skilled author, might have been made dark and scary, but Dickens infuses it with plenty of humor. Great Expectations is a gloomy tale at heart. Still, funny bits pop up everywhere, and satire lurks in the plot, making it a breezy read. Back to the story. Pip, scared by Magwitch and being naturally good-hearted, ended up stealing bread, wine, and a file from home, as ordered. While taking the stuff to Magwitch, he ran into another escaped convict. Compeyson! Pip was terrified stiff, but the convict himself zipped off in a flash. This Compeyson is Magwitch's bitter foe. When Magwitch found out he'd escaped too, he swore right then to hunt him down. Their deadly brawl ended up alerting the guards, getting both arrested again. Madwitch's tale takes a break here, but you can bet the feud with Compeyson ain't over. More escapes and crimes are bound to follow. Now, let's turn our gaze to Pip's sister, Mrs. Joe's house. Folks who know Dickens' works are aware he has a popular collection of Christmas stories, and he's honored by later generations as the man who invented Christmas. Great Expectations also tells a Christmas story, but this Christmas story doesn't seem all that joyful. It's set on Christmas Day itself. So when Pip gets home, he sees Mrs. Joe tidying up for lunch. As usual, she scolds Pip, and brother-in-law Joe steps in to defend him. And right at this Christmas lunch, Dickens vividly introduces the vulgar character, Uncle Pumblechook. Uncle Pumblechook is actually the uncle of Pip's brother-in-law, Joe. He's a wealthy grain merchant from a nearby town who comes to Mrs. Joe's for Christmas lunch every year. In Pip's eyes, he's a fat, sluggish, middle-aged man who breathes heavily with a mouth like a fish's, dull, wide eyes, and pale yellow hair sticking straight up. The novel says that seeing his looks, you'd think he was someone choked unconscious just waking up. After elegantly greeting his sister, he turns to Pip and asks, "How's the little one doing?" Actually, Pumblechook doesn't truly care about Pip. He's just using him as a talking point. He tells Pip, "You ought to think how grateful you should be." Mrs. Joe then seizes the chance to complain about how tough it was raising Pip. Pip just ducks his head, obediently listening to the adults, moralizing, while Joe quietly ladles gravy for him. Dickens isn't kind to such vulgar minor characters either. Pumblechook drinks a glass of brandy, then suddenly leaps up, coughing and choking while hopping around the table several times. His whole body convulses. Turns out he drank brandy mixed with tar water. Pip had stolen the wine for the convict and added tar water to cover it up. In the dark, he thought he was adding an equal amount of water, but it turned out to be tar water. Mrs. Joe immediately glares furiously at Pip, terrifying him. Luckily, Joe blocks with his leg, shielding Pip from Mrs. Joe's beating. Though Pip's life, living under others' roofs, wasn't wonderful, it was still a relatively peaceful childhood after all. But this peace was shattered by a trip. This outing came through Uncle Pumblechook's connections. One day he said his landlady, Miss Havisham, wanted a child companion, so he suggested Pip. Miss Havisham, mistress of Satis House, was locally famous for her wealth and coldness, living almost reclusively in her mansion. Having Pip connect with such a wealthy person thrilled Mrs. Joe immensely. Without hesitation, she had Pumblechook take Pip to Satis House. This was Pip's first journey from home and the pivotal moment that would shape his entire life. Why do we say that? Because at Satis House, Pip fell instantly in love with Miss Havisham's adopted daughter, Estella, launching the love theme of Great Expectations. Estella was about Pip's age, stunningly beautiful but incredibly haughty, like a queen. She mocked Pip, calling him boy, saying his hands were coarse and shoes clumsy, just a country bumpkin. Especially when Pip was leaving, Estella, following Miss Havisham's orders, gave him bread and beer without even glancing at him, making Pip weak from heartbreak and humiliation. Seeing this, Estella actually looked pleased. Sometimes she'd even tease Pip deliberately, letting him kiss her as reward for this rough, lowly boy. And all this made Pip realize he was nearly Estella's plaything, just a low-class laborer. But why was Estella so arrogant and perverse? This leads to her adoptive mother, Miss Havisham, who made an unforgettable first impression on Pip. Pip said, "I'd never seen such a bizarre lady. She wore a yellowed wedding gown with withered flowers. Except for some life in her sunken eyes, her whole being seemed shriveled. One room had clocks frozen in time, with a cobweb-covered wedding cake on the table. This was the scene from decades earlier, Miss Havisham's wedding day, when her groom abandoned her. Now, decades later, her clocks remain fixed at that moment, and she still wears her bridal attire. This tragic experience could lead Miss Havisham down two paths: empathy, abandoning happiness fantasies to give love to her adopted daughter, Estella, also Pip. The other path is hatred, using Estella's beauty to take revenge on men while making Pip her plaything and victim. Pip stands between these two possibilities, yet he's unaware of his position. He endures his sister's nagging and Uncle Pumblechook's lectures, but with Blacksmith Joe's care, life remains tolerable. But after meeting the haughty Estella, Pip suddenly realized everything in his life seemed coarse and low class. He once thought becoming Joe's apprentice would mean success and happiness. Now that his wish came true, reality disappoints. It only fills him with disgust and weighs heavy on his heart. Pep's discontent peaked during his next manor visit. Miss Havisham told him Estella went abroad for upper-class education. Pip returned from Satis House, utterly miserable. He imagined Estella's life abroad versus his rigid apprenticeship confined to the village and marshes. He resented his home, his trade, everything. He confided in Biddy, a girl helping at a small grocery. Like Pip, she's an orphan. They shared that bond. Pep said, "I want to be a gentleman." Biddy replied, "What's so great? Isn't our simple life happy enough?" Tip insisted, "To be happy, I need a totally different life. Nothing like this. Tip wants to grow, but he'll pay dearly for it." The growth theme runs through Great Expectations and many Dickens novels. Austrian writer Stefan Zweig authored three masters biographies of Balzac, Dickens, and Dostoevsky. On Dickens, Zweig wrote that childhood is paradise in his works. Zweig added, "Reading Dickens, whenever children grow up, anxiety wells up inside me, because I know the sweetest, most irreplaceable things are about to vanish." Exactly so. Truly, after meeting Estella at the manor, Pip's carefree childhood was gone forever. Taking over Joe's smithy as a new generation blacksmith, stuck at the forge for life, could hardly be called Great Expectations. Then in Pip's fourth apprenticeship year, his luck turned. An anonymous benefactor would fund his inheritance to receive upper-class education in London. Let's see how this windfall impacted Pip first. Hearing about the inheritance, Pip felt shock, wild joy, then unease, constantly fearing his good fortune might vanish. He even planned to help Joe and Biddy, wanting to elevate Joe's status. But Biddy dampened his spirits, saying Joe's respected as a blacksmith. Why throw that away? He might not even want it. Pip secretly guessed Miss Havisham was his benefactor. Would she let him marry Estella? So he visited Miss Havisham in custom-tailored clothes, saying, "I leave for London tomorrow," and came to bid farewell. Beyond calling him handsome and well-dressed, she showed little reaction, deepening Pip's confusion. Was Havisham truly Pip's patron? Meanwhile, Pip was already changing. This was the cost of his growth. The night before leaving, Pip tossed and turned, thrilled about entering high society, but dreading Joe seeing him off, fearing the humble blacksmith would embarrass him. Yet, he hated himself for such petty thoughts. When Joe didn't show at the coach next morning, Pip burst into tears. He saw himself as ungrateful. Now let's see how this wealth changed those around Pip. Joe promptly canceled their apprenticeship contract and flatly refused any compensation. He knew this windfall would strain their friendship, but he'd never hinder Pip's great expectations. Biddy, too, remained wise and magnanimous throughout. You could say Joe and Biddy's simplicity and kindness embodied Dickens' humanistic ideals. And in Uncle Pumblechook and other characters, Dickens vividly showcases their opportunism. For example, Pip went to Mr. Trabb's tailor shop in town to order clothes. At first, Mr. Trabb was eating breakfast in the back parlor, greeting Pip casually and asking what he wanted. Upon learning Pip had come into a fortune, he instantly changed, dropped his bread, stood up, wiped his fingers with the tablecloth, and exclaimed, "Oh my!" When Pip paid the deposit, got measured, and was about to leave, Mr. Trabb respectfully said, "Sir, I know London gentlemen rarely patronize local crafts, but if you'd kindly visit often as a fellow countryman, it'd be my great honor." "Goodbye, sir. Thank you so much. Door!" His exclamation point was shouting for the shop boy to open the door, but the boy who'd always looked down on Pip didn't get it. By the time Mr. Trabb saw Pip out, the boy was trembling with fear, and Pip realized for the first time the immense power of money. "And what about Uncle Pumblechook?" He sniffed and said a few envious words to Pip, then added, "Thinking back on how I toiled like a dog to help you succeed today fills me with immense joy and satisfaction." Needless to say, he was fishing for a reward. He used to call Pip "little one," but now it's "my dear young friend." Then he asked for Pip's permission for everything he did. He asked "may I" countless times that evening, and shook Pip's hand hundreds of times. After Pip left, he stood there waving repeatedly until Pip turned the corner. Soon after, Pip did farewell to Joe and Biddy and left the village for London to pursue his great expectations. When he departed, the morning mist had already dissipated in solemnity. The dazzling world lay before him. Although leaving the countryside, the poor and his friends brought some nostalgia and melancholy, these feelings, under the glow of his joyful great expectations, vanished quickly like the morning mist. Now entering Pip's brighter second life phase, the story shifts to London, the city that carries Pip's dream of high society. Although Dickens' novel mainly focuses on Pip's great expectations, in reality, other characters in the story are also pursuing their own great expectations. For example, Uncle Pumblechook is very shrewd. As the saying goes, when one man attains the Tao, his chickens and dogs rise to heaven too. He always wants to use Pip's success to climb higher. After Pip went to London, Pumblechook immediately placed ads in the local newspaper, boasting that he had created a gentleman. Then there's Pip's fellow villager, Mr. Wopsle, who was originally a church clerk in the village but later moved to London to become an amateur actor. His plays became the butt of everyone's jokes. But Mr. Wopsle insisted that the audience's appreciation level needed improvement. If he were to die one day, the entire theater world would be utterly ruined. These characters' great expectations intertwine with Pip's, giving the novel rich layers. Moreover, closely connected to Pip's great expectations are two important figures, the lawyer Jaggers and the young Herbert. Let's start with the lawyer Jaggers. He is Pip's guardian, and Jaggers managed Pip's upbringing plan. Jaggers is also Miss Havisham's lawyer. This naturally led Pip to believe that Miss Havisham was his benefactor. Jaggers is cold and imposing, meticulous in his work, and very tight-lipped. Therefore, Pip couldn't confirm the benefactor's name from him. As for Herbert, he's about Pip's age and comes from a modest background. He and Pip first met at Sada's house, where two hot-headed young men got into a fight, but later became good friends through the conflict. Herbert told Pip that Miss Havisham adopted Estella to take revenge on all men. This advice had little effect on Pip, who was deeply in love. During Estella's time abroad, Pip's love for her only grew. He still naively believed Miss Havisham was his benefactress, intending to match him with Estella. Pip's first return home was prompted by Miss Havisham's invitation, as Estella had returned from studying abroad. For Pip, this homecoming was a triumphant return. The theme of great expectations is revealed more profoundly here, and Pip once again experiences inner turmoil. At first, he thought he should stay at Joe's house, but after booking a coach seat for the next day, he made excuses, saying staying at Joe's would trouble them, and finally decided to stay at the Blue Boar Inn. Later at Sada's house, he saw Estella and found her even more charming and beautiful than before. Pip was both enchanted and ashamed. Miss Havisham told Pip, I raised her, educated her, just to make people love her. You must love her quickly." Chip had an ominous feeling about Miss Havisham's constant talk of love. He said, "Miss Havisham keeps saying love over and over. No doubt it's heartfelt." That word, love, spat out repeatedly from her mouth, felt like a curse each time. Even if she said words like hatred, despair, or revenge, they wouldn't sound as venomous as this love. From this, we can roughly predict that Pip and Estella's future isn't bright. Since then, this unease has indeed lingered in Pip's mind. He always felt that he didn't even have a 1 in 10,000 chance of luck, practically none. Just then, another suitor appeared around Estella. Drummle, a friend of Lawyer Jagger's. Pip despised Drummle, but Estella didn't reject his advances. Instead, she toyed with him, making Pip feel even more despair. When the true benefactor appeared, Pip suddenly realized that Miss Havisham's kindness was just his own fantasy. She never intended Estella for him. At Sada's house, I was merely a tool used when there was no one else to torment, exploiting me as a compliant puppet to test their methods. We've finally come to Pip's benefactor appearing. So who is this mysterious person? This long-awaited character made an entrance amid a violent storm. That night, the wind brought heavy rain, rattling against the windows. The whole house felt like a lighthouse in a storm. Pip suddenly heard footsteps on the stairs, audible even over the storm, suggesting this person walked heavily. When the door opened to let the stranger in, Pip was shocked to recognize the chilling face. It was the convict from years ago. Naturally, Pip was resistant to Magwitch, the convict. He told Magwitch, "Our encounter years ago was mere coincidence. Things are different now. I never want to have that kind of dealings with you again." Years ago, Magwitch had someone give Pip £1 notes, but Pip handed them back right then and there to cut ties for good. To Pip's surprise, Magwitch casually folded the 2 notes together and burned them under a lamp. Then Magwitch slowly asked Pip a few questions. "Since we parted on that desolate cold marsh, how did your life improve? Is the property you inherited of that amount? And is your guardian a lawyer whose name starts with J?" By then, Pip had a vague premonition. It wasn't until Jagger's name surfaced that he finally saw his true situation. His anonymous benefactor, who had always refused to reveal his name, was this very convict before him. Magwitch! Everything felt like an earthquake. Pip stood dumbfounded, one hand on the chair back, the other pressing his chest as he struggled to breathe. Staring at Magwitch, Pip felt dizzy. This convict he'd wanted to dismiss with 2 notes was the reason for his current status. Magwitch's appearance shattered Pip's illusions and proved his feelings for Estella were one-sided. A devastating blow. At first, on learning about his inheritance while passing the marsh, he thought of Magwitch, wondering if he'd been exiled far away or was dead. Yet Magwitch hadn't died. He stood before Pip now. He said, "I crossed oceans to see you. I aimed to make Pip a gentleman, to repay you for saving my life." Since Pip saved him on the marsh, Magwitch vowed, "For every gold coin I earn, I'll give it to you. I've suffered so you could live comfortably. I toiled hard so you wouldn't have to." So what happened to Magwitch back then? He was sent to New South Wales, which is now part of Australia. In Dickens' time, New South Wales was a British colony where Magwitch endured great humiliation. To those riding past on fine horses, he'd mutter, "I'm raising a fine gentleman. You can't compare." This belief helped Magwitch endure the hardships. Let's begin. He was hired to herd sheep, living in a lonely shack where he saw only sheep faces daily, almost forgetting human faces, yet always remembered Pip's. Later, his dying employer gave him money. After serving his term, he earned more, saved everything, and gave it to Jaggers. This became Pip's windfall. Magwitch saw himself as Pip's second father. He told Pip, "You're dearer to me than my own son." His words deeply moved Pip. When Magwitch lowered his voice, gravely saying, I'm sentenced to life exile. Returning means death. Pip fully grasped that Magwitch entrusted not just his money, but his life to him. Pip's first thought was to lower the blinds. He knew he must protect this man, his fate now bound to Magwitch's. This ends the second phase of Pip's great expectations. Looking back, we see a subtle parallel between Magwitch and Miss Havisham. Both made molding another person their life's goal, harboring obsessive love for their protege. That their purposes differed. Miss Havisham raised Estella to be a peerless beauty to avenge her lover's abandonment. She hated all men. Magwitch cultivated Pip as a gentleman to compensate for his own failures. He hoped Pip would achieve the life goals a convict never could. Ultimately, both characters converge. Dickens uses their stories to explore revenge's profound theme. The novel enters its third part, advancing the plot while unraveling earlier mysteries. Through Magwitch's account, we learn about the other convict. Compeyson framed Magwitch, leading to Magwitch's life exile sentence. Yet Compeyson received only a light punishment. And Compeyson had a crucial other identity. He was the heartless man who abandoned Miss Havisham. With help from Miss Havisham's brother, who resented their father's unfair inheritance, Compeyson pretended to marry her, then vanished after swindling a fortune. Even more coincidentally, Miss Havisham's adopted daughter, Estella, is actually Magwitch's biological daughter. Magwitch had believed his daughter was killed, but in reality, she'd been adopted by Miss Havisham. Magwitch had dreamed of making Pip a gentleman. He never imagined his own daughter had become an upper-class lady, nor that she'd been raised by his enemy, Compeyson's victim. This fateful irony was beyond coincidence. These coincidences, revealed through Dickens' carefully laid clues, are both shocking and brilliantly satisfying. Next comes Magwitch's rescue mission. Pip must smuggle him out secretly. If caught, this escaped convict faces hanging. Dickens vividly depicts Magwitch's escape with thrilling twists and turns. This journey also purifies Pip's soul as he confronts his great expectations. Dickens' biographer notes, he personally sailed Thames sections to research this escape scene, recording details for authentic writing. Initially, Pip and Herbert meticulously planned Magwitch's escape, practicing rowing daily for preparation. On escape day, they stayed at an inn frequented by smugglers. The next day, they rowed onward. Nothing happened until 1:30 p.m., when their worst fear materialized. A steamship billowing black smoke headed straight toward them. The helmsman declared Magwitch under arrest, with Compeyson aboard. Knowing Magwitch sneaked back from exile, Compeyson had betrayed him. Before Pip could react, Magwitch leaped onto the ship and fought Compeyson, both plunging into water. Compeyson drowned, Magwitch swam back and was captured. Heartbroken, Pip sat beside Magwitch, thinking, from now on, as long as he lives, I must stay by his side. And by now, Pip had fully accepted this fate. The novel writes, this poor man holding my hand, now trapped, severely injured and shackled. But I only felt his immense kindness. All these years, he never forgot me, repaying me with everything he had. Next, Magwitch went to prison. Pip worked tirelessly for his pardon, but all efforts failed. Magwitch was gravely ill. Pip visited him in prison daily. Dickens showed deep sympathy for this character, sparing him hanging. He died in prison. Before death, Pip stayed by his side. He didn't tell Magwitch the property had been confiscated. He shielded Magwitch's dream, only asking, you know what? You have a beloved daughter. She didn't die. She married into nobility, became a lady. She's beautiful. I love her deeply. During this, Magwitch used his last strength to kiss Pip's hand. After Magwitch died, Pip kept vigil, reading Luke from the New Testament. Lord, have mercy on this sinner. With Magwitch's property seized, Pip lost his income. Creditors hounded him. Poverty and illness struck again. When Pip finally recovered, he opened his eyes to see Joe beside him. Thinking it a hallucination, he dared ask, "Is it really you, Joe?" In familiar hometown tones, Joe replied, "Aye, old chap." Those words overwhelmed Pip with joy and sorrow. Joe had rushed to help after hearing of Pip's plight. Once Pip fully recovered, Joe quietly returned home. Before leaving, he wrote Pip a letter with receipts for all repaid debts. Grateful, Pip longed to visit home again. But this homecoming felt different. Even before arriving, gossip about his fall spread through town. Uncle Pumblechook saw Pip and said, "Seeing you tumble from such heights pains me. But really, could you have avoided falling?" Remember how Pumblechook groveled when Pip first got lucky? Now, Biddy's changed attitude makes the contrast painfully clear. Actually, during this homecoming, Pip also harbored the intention to propose to Biddy. He wanted Biddy, who once loved him, to know he returned in humble repentance. If Biddy would agree, he'd brave any hardship and do his utmost to make her exceptionally happy. But his dream was shattered. Upon returning to the village, he arrived just in time for Joe and Biddy's wedding, since Mrs. Joe had passed away from illness. Now, Joe and Biddy, two kind and simple souls, two decent folks, were married. Pip sincerely blessed them and was grateful he hadn't voiced his thoughts. And Pip said, "Dear Joe, I hope you have several children. On winter nights, may a little boy sit by this fireplace. Then you might remember another boy who once sat here too." Pip said. That other boy clearly referred to his former self. Later, Pip joined Herbert and took on significant responsibilities in his company. Having undergone this baptism of fate, 11 years later, Pip visited the countryside. Peeking into Joe's home, he indeed saw in the corner, partly hidden by Joe's leg, the same little stool he'd sat on. The child gazing at the fire on that stool looked just like a second version of himself. In fact, it was a little Pip. To honor him, Joe and Biddy named their son Pip. They also had a daughter. Pip hoped to adopt little Pip. But he gently said, "No, no, you should marry." Truth was, after losing his great expectations and learning of Biddy and Joe's marriage, Pip felt emotionally devastated. He didn't plan to marry. High society and Estella seemed like a pitiful dream, long vanished. Pip vaguely felt that all those years since leaving the kitchen of his old home might have just been a feverish dream, a spiritual ordeal. Now he was finally cured. He had woken from that great expectations dream. Pip had made peace with his great expectations. Meanwhile, through Miss Havisham's ending, Dickens deepened the theme of reconciliation. Later, Satis House caught fire. Pip rescued Miss Havisham from the blaze, but soon after, Miss Havisham died from nervous shock caused by the fire. Before dying, she made a will, leaving most to Estella, but also money to Miss Sarah, Miss Anna, Mrs. Camilla, etc. These ladies were all people Miss Havisham once resented, but now she's let go of all grudges against everyone. She'd married Estella to Drummle, but this aristocrat was foolish and arrogant. He treated Estella coldly and harshly, making her married life deeply unhappy. On her deathbed, Miss Havisham constantly blamed herself for using Estella as a revenge tool. She deeply regretted it, finally releasing the hatred that haunted her lifelong. At novel's end, Pip revisited Satis House and unexpectedly met the solitary Estella. Drummle had died accidentally. Estella returned, reuniting with Pip, thus ending Great Expectations. This 400,000 plus word novel gives us vivid characters, intricate plots, and themes like love, growth, revenge, and reconciliation. Dickens perfectly blends these elements with a multi-threaded structure. The main thread is Pip's pursuit and collapse of Great Expectations. Beneath it branch two subplots, Magwitch nurturing Pip and Miss Havisham raising Estella. Dickens employs retrospective narration, adult Pip recounting his younger self's story. Adult Pip is the omniscient narrator, yet young Pip remains the true storyteller. Dickens perfectly merges the narrative self with life's experiential self. Thus, Dickens' Great Expectations earns its title as English's most outstanding, perfectly structured novel. Its greatness also lies in the powerful realism it demonstrates. Weathered by life, Pip and Estella's youth is gone. Hand in hand, they leave Satis House ruins in dissipating morning mist. Such mist appeared when Pip brought food to Magwitch when he returned from Satis House and when he left to pursue expectations. Um, Now scarred by life, Pip and Estella bear marks no years can erase. Yet, as they walk from Satis House ruins, they stride with calm dignity. Oh, Dickens wrote tenderly. Where the night mist disperses, the moonlight shines pure and vast, serene and boundless, with no more shadows in sight, seeming to promise we'll never part again. All right, that wraps up our interpretation of Dickens' Great Expectations. You'll find reading notes below the audio. See you tomorrow.